Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this Kirby cake. He's all decked out as Link. I thought this was super cute. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy it and also subscribe to my channel for new videos every week. That being said, let's get right into it. I'm starting out with an 8-inch cake that I've already iced and covered in fondant. If you need to see how to do that, I will link those videos below. My fondant was a really pale blue and I've painted over that with some blue food coloring I mixed with a little bit of food grade alcohol. You've seen me paint cakes before. I just did a couple coats of this and I let it dry in between coats completely. To make Kirby, I'm going to be making like a giant cake pop. You could make him from Rice Krispies. You could also use a styrofoam ball. I wanted to do cake this time, but whatever your preference is. So I've taken some extra cake and mixed it with a little bit of icing until I have this pliable dough. You want to make sure that you can roll it in your hands and it stays together. It's not too dry and crumbly and not too soft, so it's going to fall apart and lose its shape. I formed my cake pop dough into a good size ball, roughly the size of a grapefruit, and then I'm placing that onto a cake board. I just put a little bit of parchment on there to keep it from sticking, and I'm putting that in the fridge to firm up a bit. After about 10 minutes, the dough was a little more chilled and I reshaped it. Once it's cold, it's going to be a lot easier for you to get a nice perfect circle. Once I was happy with the shape, I added a thin crumb coat of chocolate ganache on the outside. It does not have to be perfect, you just want to make sure the whole thing is covered. That parchment paper was just giving me the runaround, so I got rid of that and I just have my cake ball right on top of my board. And once my crumb coat was on there, I popped that in the fridge for about 25 minutes to chill. Once the ganache had set, I added another layer all the way around my cake ball, and to help me get it really smooth, I'm using a piece of cardstock. This just bends to the shape of the cake, so it's going to help me get it way smoother than I could with just my spatula. It's important here that you don't let any of that ganache build up at the bottom of the ball. You want to make sure you get it as round as possible, so really scrape down the bottom. Once it was nice and smooth, I just put that back in the fridge to firm up. Because I used cake, it is a little on the heavy side, so I know I'm going to have to add a support underneath this when I add it to the cake. So I have the bottom here, it's a little bit ragtag. I'm adding a little piece of cake board that I cut out, and I'm just attaching it on the bottom. You could clean this up and add more ganache on the bottom to smooth it out. It was just going to be sitting flat on the cake, so I was not too worried about it. At this point, I was ready to move on to fondant, so on my cornstarch surface, I rolled out this bubblegum pinky Kirby shade to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Before I picked this up and draped it over my cake, I just brushed my ganache with a little bit of water to help the fondant stick. Spherical cakes are notoriously a huge pain in the butt to cover in fondant. The trick is to have a big enough piece of fondant and just work really quickly to pull out all those pleats. I like to go around the cake as I work my way down versus just trying to smooth one side down all the way to the bottom and moving on. If you do this, just take your time, but also work quickly, if that makes sense. Just pay really special attention to the bottom area. That's where you're going to get the big bunches. But as you can see here, once I got to the bottom, I was in pretty good shape. I trimmed away some of my excess fondant and then used those offcuts, balled them up and dusted them with a little bit of cornstarch, and I'm going to use this as my fondant smoother. This is going to help me buff out any rough patches over my Kirby ball. And at the bottom, I'm just pushing it in slightly just so it tucks under. I trimmed away the rest of my excess and then picked my ball up very gingerly and just tucked that fondant down as far as I could. I really liked the texture that the brushed food coloring gave, but I wanted to add a little bit more, so I took some white food coloring and a fluffy brush and just splattered that all over my cake. Before I can add him to my cake, I need to add a support to go right underneath him. So I've marked off on a wooden dowel where it's going to be flush with the cake, and then I cut that down to size and inserted it right in the middle. I added a little smear of royal icing right on top of that dowel, and this is going to dry really hard and hold that ball in place, and it's going to keep it from rolling off of my cake and off into the sunset. To start on his features, I have two black ovals that I'm placing on the very front for his eyes. Kirby is going to have like this determined look on his face, so with my X-Acto knife, I'm just cutting the tips off of each eye. I added a line of black fondant right where I cut just to give it a little more expression. I added 2 little ovals of white fondant into the top corner and trimmed those down as well. I used a piping tip to create these little crescent moon shapes out of light blue fondant, and those are going right in the bottom. With a slightly darker pink shade, I have 2 ovals on either side for the blush of his cheeks. To create Link's hat, I have this cone of green fondant. The end is quite tapered, and I'm just very gently pressing that onto the head, trying to spread out the bottom a bit. Just being mindful not to press too hard and warp Kirby's head. I pulled the tip of that over and then added a couple lines in with my fondant tool just to give it more of a fabric look. With the strip of yellow fondant, I'm going around the base of my hat and then cutting a seam at the back. I've added all these pieces with shortening PS, but you could also use water or piping gel. I inserted a little piece of dried spaghetti into the tip of my hat and then a yellow ball right onto that just to help it hold in place so it's not going to fall off from the weight. For his shoes, I used red fondant and made this like egg type shape. You can see here it's slightly tapered at one end, and I'm putting those on either side of him, just splayed out a little bit. If yours do not stay in place, you can add another piece of dried spaghetti in there. He has these really cute, stubby, triangular-esque arms. So one on either side, and I did place one a little higher up because that one is going to be proudly holding his master sword. To make the sword, I just freehanded the shape based off of the picture I was looking at. I will link that below. So I started off with the blade and then extended that down a little bit longer than I wanted it to because I wanted to have space for the handle. Using my knife, I indented a line right down the middle, just being careful not to cut through the fondant, and then added 2 lines on either side as well. With my piping tips, I created this crescent moon shape out of some dark blue fondant, and I added that a little bit higher up than the bottom. You want to make sure there is some room underneath it. With my fondant tool, I added a couple lines to match the picture I was looking at, and then a circle of blue fondant right in the middle. I used the back of my fondant tool to indent a hole, and then I had this gold sprinkle, so that just fit perfectly. I added a little bit of shortening to hold it in place. You could also just use some white fondant and luster dust that bad boy gold as well. To make it so I can insert the sword into Kirby's hand, I rolled out more of my gray fondant, and I'm brushing that with a little bit of water and then placing a skewer down, making sure it's going to go high enough that most of the sword is going to have support. Then I just cut around that shape using my X-Acto knife. I trimmed away the excess that I didn't want at the bottom and wrapped that with a strip of blue fondant. I let that set up for about an hour before I tried to add it to Kirby, and then when I did, I very carefully put it through his arm and made sure that excess dowel went into Kirby and into the cake and not down the side and poking out. As a nod to Kirby's warp star, I added a big one right on the front. I just used my cutters to cut out different sizes and then added some of the smaller ones around that and 2 more of those big ones on either side. Once they were all laid down, I mixed together more of that white food coloring with a little bit of yellow and just dotted that around just to give it more of a magical feel. To finish him off, I added a black piece of fondant for his mouth and then a little ball of pink fondant for his tongue. And this was the final result, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.